This year's Russian invasion of Ukraine is about a month old, and it's apparent to anyone watching that music is a fundamental part of the Ukrainian identity, as we see orchestras bravely playing in the street and adults and children alike singing while they hide from shelling. I'm Colleen Phelps. In this special look behind the playlist, Ukrainian pianists Dmitri and Anna Shelest and their re-release of a 2018 album, Ukrainian Rhapsody. Anna and Dmitri, thanks for taking the time to join me. I know this is a really difficult time. We're approaching 1 month tomorrow since this year's invasion. I want to start by just asking, is your family okay?
Yes, our family are fine, even though they live in very dangerous cities that's under constant shelling from Russians. It's a city of Kharkiv. It's very close to the Russian border. And they're coping with this dramatic change to their life. But they're staying strong and optimistic. Even when we call them, they're able to, still tell jokes and, try to keep the spirit up. But, it's a very difficult time for them. But thank you for asking.
The sense of humor, it feels like it's a really important part of this for the Ukrainian people. Is that?
Yes, absolutely. Because you just need to have something to keep the hope up and kind of look forward to the days when you can kind of make jokes and be safe and happy. So I think we're all looking forward to those times.
And I think it's also amazing to see how their spirit is so unbreakable in a way, because obviously the whole world sees that Ukraine and Ukrainians are living in horror. Yet when we call them, they're trying to not live in the moment, but to try to live in the future past this moment and to look forward to rebuilding the country and to resuming the normal life. So they're trying to maybe do their best to keep the spirits up, to separate them from the horrors that they're living in. So which is it's very difficult for them and for us. And what we keep on admiring is that when we call it, from an ocean away, is how they're in the midst of all of it, are trying to carry on with their lives and to resume as much normalcy as humanly possible.
Before we talk more about war, I want to talk about love. When did you two start playing piano together?
Well, Dmitri and I, we met when we were children in Kharkiv. We were in the same musical school together. Then we kind of reconnected again in the United States. So we knew each other for a very long time, but we started playing together actually after we got married. And a few people asked us, do you guys play together? And we thought, well, why not? We can try and see what happens. And it just became a really wonderful experience to make music together. And there's so much great music for piano duos. So it's just something that happened later in life. We knew each other for a very long time before we actually started playing at the same instrument.
But it also may have to do with the fact that when we met each other, we were students, be it in middle school or high school or college. So maybe on some level, I regret that we did not start doing this earlier, but it so happens that when you're in college, you have a certain curriculum, musically speaking, and this sort of a beaten path that is college life. So you have to learn a certain repertoire. You prepare for this competition. You have that to prepare for your jury. So creative repertoire and chamber music is not really a priority, even though, let's say, you'll always learn a piano quintet or a trio, or yes, of course, there's going to be a piano duo, four hands or two piano, but you're really not looking deeper than that. Your focus is still piano solo and whatever it takes to excel as a musician in college. So I think that perhaps in retrospect, it would be much beneficial if we looked at that before we graduated college.
Are there particular challenges to playing along with your spouse?
Actually, I don't think there are. I think in a way it's easier because, the rehearsal process, it can be kind of a challenging from a perspective of how to communicate your wishes. So if you play with a person that you might not know so well, it might take time for you to tell them diplomatically that, well, I think let's try this. You spend a lot of time explaining, but when you know each other so well, I think we can be very efficient in kind of telling each other, okay, I don't like this, let's try this. It's very easy to be kind of honest, open, and I find it actually really fun. I don't think we ever had kind of strong arguments or fights over whoever, whose idea is better. It's been always a kind of very open process for us.
I actually think there's also a logistical side to it that will flip this question backwards, because when you're in a regular setting, a chamber music setting, let's say a piano trio or a piano duet performing, Ravel the Valse for two pianos, generally speaking, in most of those ensembles, most of the time is spent to learn each part. And then, if you really have a deadline in a few days, if everyone really knows their parts, you could put together a program because you know what everyone's doing. But when it comes to a piano four-hand ensemble, which is what we are focusing on, the unique part there is two people share one instrument or one keyboard, and that creates all sorts of logistical issues. So the process of preparing a program is sort of backwards, or disproportional in the amount of rehearsing, because you could spend all the time you want learning your bottom part or your top part, but most progress will happen when you're together, because all of a sudden you start realizing that there is not as much space as you thought there would be. And you have to figure out the whole elbow bumping situation and where each hand goes in the middle, because there is a lot of conflicts, just logistically speaking. So where I'm getting with this whole thing is just like in couples figure skating or dancing, most of them are either brothers or sisters or husband and wives, because they just get to spend so much time together. And that's probably one of the more unique elements of playing one piano four hands.
I was struck by a quote on your website I found from Ban Ki-moon that said, your duo realized diplomacy through music. And that seems to be a running theme with performances at places like UNESCO and the World Trade Center. And I wondered what you both feel the arts, and especially classical music, can play. What role can they play in diplomacy?
Well, this was one of the challenges for me this last month, to see what can we do as musicians to contribute or change something. Because when the war started, I kind of felt completely useless. Like, my family is in danger. What can I do? I can't go fight. I'm too, scared to do this. But it felt like playing piano. It's no help to anyone. Like, why would anyone care about this? But then I noticed that how much it meant for people when, for example, Metropolitan Opera, they performed Ukrainian anthem. It meant so much to me, and I know to many Ukrainians. And just seeing now when people play Ukrainian music, they acknowledge Ukrainian culture, I see that it makes a difference. So I think it kind of made me realize that we can play a part in making sure that a Ukrainian identity is reaffirmed every day, because part of the kind of this very aggressive narrative from Russia is that Ukraine doesn't exist as a country, it doesn't exist as people. It's artificial, and this is something that millions of people in Russia believe. And this propaganda, it's even kind of being brought into the West, and I've heard some people even in American media entertain these ideas, which are very dangerous, and we see what they can lead to. So I think what we can do as musicians is show the world that Ukraine is a unique country with unique culture, with very, very old culture. And it has been aspiring to be part of the Western world for centuries. And this is something that I think not many people realize outside of the Ukraine. In Ukraine, it's very, very important, and people know about it. People want to become part of the Western culture, a part of Europe. And actually our President Zelensky, he talked about it very passionately, how Ukraine wants to be a part of the European family. Please accept us. And they're doing everything. They are paying for this right with their blood right now to be part of Europe. And I think what culture can show, even like with pieces of music that has been written over 200 years ago, is that Ukrainians, they were aspiring to be independent, to have very unique, their own identity, that just want to live peacefully. They want to speak their language. They want to raise their children in peace, and be proud of their lands, their culture, their language, and just being people who can live in peace.
An interesting factor in sort of digging through our library and figuring out which composers have connections to Ukraine was figuring out how many Russian composers had connections to Ukraine, and how many Ukrainian composers who we would label as Ukrainian now were labeled as Soviet at the time. And so there's this, while there is this very clearly seen Ukrainian identity, there's also this sort of group of composers who walked back and forth between the two countries so freely. I think Tchaikovsky's a really good example. What, as Ukrainians, does that music feel like to you right now?
Well, it's true that there's a bit of a kind of gray area when we start thinking about these questions, but I think it only I'm kind of ambivalent when you look from far away. When you begin to look a little bit more closely, I think there are ways to tell, like for myself, the way I would say which composer is Ukrainian versus composer who is Russian. And Ukrainian composers, to me, are those who really made their Ukrainian identity the center of their art. Like, for example, composers like Prokofiev, who was born in Ukraine. I think he was a Russian composer. He was really a Soviet composer. And the reason for it is that Russia, as a huge empire, it took resources from countries and from lands that it occupied. And often for artists, for people who wanted to get somewhere, the only way to promote their art was to actually enter and go to Russia, go to Moscow, to St. Petersburg, because those were centers in which it was possible for them to have more opportunities. But there are other composers, like Mykola Lysenko, who is kind of the first composer on our Ukrainian Rhapsody recording, who made a real effort, and he was prosecuted for the fact that he wanted to separate his music from kind of the Russian worldview. For example, Tchaikovsky really admired his opera Taras Bulba. He even wanted to help Lysenko to stage it in St. Petersburg. But in order for this to happen, he had to translate it into Russian, which Lysenko refused. He said, no, this is my opera. It has to be sung in Ukrainian because, that's an important element of his musical language. And I think it's when you read about composers and you kind of see what stand they took in this constant conversation, and it's not sometimes maybe they weren't even thinking so clearly in this terms of this identity. I'm not maybe judging some composers who chose to go to Russia, and it's not about that. But the Ukrainian composers, they really had a very firm stance, and they had to sacrifice a lot to make sure that they published. It's the same thing with writers too, that they published in Ukrainian, they wrote in Ukrainian, they made Ukrainian kind of folk music. They put it at the heart of their musical language. So I think there a lot to learn about kind of what really makes Ukrainian culture and identity. And I hope when we have peaceful time, there'll be many, many more hours and years that we can devote to really examining it. It's a very important issue.
Can you talk a little bit about those pieces by Lysenko that especially include the Ukrainian folk songs or older Ukrainian songs? Are those, I'm thinking of like the Florence Price folk songs in Counterpoint for us. Those are songs we know that we recognize. Is it similar in the arrangements?
Yes, definitely. And so this is, I think, that piece, when I actually came across this piece, it was a few years back, and I thought, wow, this is so amazing that he wrote it, 100 of years ago. But it's the same conversation. He was presenting Ukrainian music in the light of European tradition. So he took Ukrainian songs and he kind of used this Baroque suite type to structure to make it into this beautiful art. So that was something very striking to me about this particular work, how Ukrainian it sounded to me. At the same time, it kind of has this very Western streak as well.
Miroslav Skorik was alive when you recorded the album. He passed away in 2020, but did you get to meet him? What was he like?
We almost got to meet him. It was actually an amusing, almost a coincidence. We were in 2018. We were presenting a concert at Weill Hall at Carnegie Hall, which included a lot of Ukrainian music, and that was connected with the release of the Ukrainian Rhapsody CD. And Miroslav Skorik lived in Kyiv toward the end of his life, and so we didn't meet him prior to that. So, but somehow I was able to get his cell phone. So I called him up because as we were rehearsing and preparing, I wanted to talk about, what he had to say about the 3 extravagant dances. And he was just very supportive, very kind of liberating. And he didn't quite say, oh, this is my way of doing it. It was a very warm and very informal conversation, but the unfortunate, in some way, part was that the concert at the Carnegie Hall was planned for February, and he was celebrating his 80th birthday. So he would arrive to New York 5 days later. So we really wanted him to be there at the concert, and he wanted to be there too, but it was too much of a short notice before the concert for him to change his travel arrangements. That said, we did go to the Ukrainian Institute of America here on the Upper East Side in New York City, where the 80th anniversary of Skorik celebration took place. And of course, there was a ton of people, it was all sold out. And there was a concert, part of which he performed as part of the piano duo with other musicians, because he did love to write for piano four hands and two pianos and various ensembles. And we did get a chance to meet him afterwards and give him our CD, and I think he was quite pleased that that we chose to record his work, and he was very supportive. And that was unfortunately the only time we got to meet him in person, but we still cherish that memory. So yeah.
What was his, or is his, stature sort of like among composers in Ukraine?
Oh, still number one. Still at this point, I think maybe when he was alive, he was like the most famous living composer. And I think, Beethoven had his Furelise, and everybody knows that in the whole world. And Skorik was commissioned to write music for a Ukrainian movie in the early 80s, The Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. And he wrote a tune called The Melody. And since then it was absolutely number one, his most recognized composition. And I think many people who don't even know his art so much would most likely hear that melody. And it's performed every which way, on piano and violin, voice, choir, you name it, because it's, it's like a vocalese format. It doesn't have lyrics in it, but it's so romantic and so powerful as far as expressing the nationalistic identity that he wanted to convey in that movie. So, but these days, I mean, he's still a giant as far as a great Ukrainian composer of the past, few generations, along with a few others.
I would like to add, if you had a chance to watch President Zelensky address the Congress, he showed the video of Ukraine, and the music, that was that melody by Skorik. So that beautiful violin performance, that was that piece. That's very, was very poignant accompaniment to that heartbreaking video.
I have a lot of friends who are musicians who, for the last month, have kind of said, we were sort of just getting back to performing, and then suddenly we watch this happening. We can see it so clearly, and what we do feels kind of silly in a time like this. I had a friend who was about to go perform a children's opera, and he said, I can't believe this is what I'm doing while this is happening in the world. What do you have to say to your fellow classical artists who sort of look around and think, what am I doing right now with the world looking like this?
I think that it sounds like the whole musical world felt the same way right away because of such a shock and disbelief, and you're absolutely disoriented mentally. And of course, the last thing you want to do is, perform a children's opera when 1 or 2 days ago, there is this horror unraveling. So, but one of what actually very important things we learned was people in Ukraine, politicians, public figures, encourage to the greatest degree possible to do what it is people do best. They're saying, look, you don't have to go fight because there are soldiers for that. There are people who want to do that, who can do that, who are good at that. You are good at certain things. Go open your bakery. Go give someone a haircut. Go cook a soup and give that to us. So play your music. Do the job that you do well, because everything you do well helps Ukraine. So I think that after a while, however long it took for individual people, when you kind of come back to your senses from this, shock, then I think it starts making sense that it is actually uplifting for Ukrainians to see that, you know, when a Metropolitan Opera does the national anthem so beautifully, it can't not have its effect on the rest of the world, particularly for Ukraine. So I think that that was very inspiring to hear it from Ukrainians urging us.
You can find Ukrainian Rhapsody wherever you stream music, and of course, you'll be hearing it on 90.5 WUOL Classical Louisville.